My name's Nolan. I'm 34, and I've been married to my wife Elise for almost 7 years. We've had our share of ups and downs like most couples, but overall, I'd say our relationship has been strong, built on mutual respect, quiet routines, and a shared appreciation for not making life harder than it needs to be. I've never been flashy. I'm not the loudest guy in the room, and I don't feel the need to constantly prove myself. That's probably why some people think they can walk all over me, especially Elise's mother, Barbara. Now, let me just say, I don't hate my mother-in-law. At least, I didn't used to. I always assumed she was just one of those strong personality types. She never outright insulted me in the early years, but there was always this tone, a subtle edge to her voice when she said my name. Backhanded compliments, the kind you're supposed to laugh off even though they stick to your ribs like glue. Oh, Nolan, you're so laid back. It's amazing Elise can get you to do anything. Or, it must be nice not having the pressure of a real job. At first, I chalked it up to generational differences. Barbara was a career woman back in the day, corporate shark type, retired now, but still carries herself like she's running a boardroom. She wore pantsuits to brunch. Elise used to laugh it off and say her mom was just intense. I figured if Elise could handle it, so could I. We live in a modest but comfortable house in a quiet suburb just outside the city. The kind of place where the neighbors wave but don't pry, and everyone keeps their grass just a little too perfect. What most people don't know, what even Elise didn't fully realize at first, is that I come from money. Not mansion in Beverly Hills money, but enough. My grandfather was a contractor who invested in real estate before it was trendy. When he passed, the properties he left behind went into a trust. My dad managed it for years before handing the reins to me. So no, I don't have a 9 to 5. I don't clock in. I don't wear a tie, but I work. I manage tenants. I handle renovations, inspections, property taxes. I just do it from home, in jeans and a hoodie, with a spreadsheet open and a phone to my ear. Barbara never saw it that way. It really started after Barbara had knee surgery last year. It was supposed to be routine, but she took longer than expected to bounce back. Elise, being the generous soul she is, offered her mom our guest room while she recovered. A few weeks, she said, just until she's back on her feet. I wasn't thrilled about it. Barbara's the kind of guest who comments on the dust on the baseboards, but I agreed. Family's family. A few weeks turned into a few months, then into a full year. Barbara made herself right at home. She stocked our pantry with her specific brand of herbal tea and gluten-free crackers, took over the sunroom as her private reading lounge, and left sticky notes around the house reminding us to keep surfaces clean and turn off lights in unused rooms. It was like living with a passive-aggressive Alexa, but I held my tongue. Elise was stressed enough. She was pulling long shifts at the hospital, she's a nurse, and the last thing she needed was me starting a cold war with her mother. I kept to my routines, managed my properties, made coffee every morning, folded laundry, paid bills. I didn't need validation from Barbara. I figured as long as Elise and I were good, that's all that mattered. But over time, I started noticing small changes. Elise began parroting some of Barbara's little comments. Maybe you should try getting out of the house more. You've got time to spare, why not try freelancing or something? Don't you miss the structure of a real job? I knew where this was coming from. Barbara had always equated productivity with office culture. She couldn't wrap her head around the fact that I wasn't stressed out and sleep-deprived, that I didn't punch a clock or attend Monday meetings. It didn't matter that I was covering 70% of our household bills, or that the rental property I just renovated would bring in another passive income stream for years. She saw me in sweats and assumed I was doing nothing. Still, I stayed quiet. Until last weekend. It was a Sunday. Elise had just finished her third night shift in a row and was passed out in our bedroom. I was making eggs in the kitchen when Barbara walked in, dressed like she was about to go lecture at an Ivy League symposium. She gave my outfit, shorts and a t-shirt, a once-over, and wrinkled her nose. You know, she said casually, like she was commenting on the weather, it's really something how you've managed to avoid full-time employment this long. Must be nice having a wife who supports you. I froze, spatula mid-flip. Come again. She smiled. That tight, smug smile that never reached her eyes. Oh, don't take it the wrong way, Nolan. I just mean, it's unusual these days. Most men would feel a little embarrassed not contributing equally. I laughed, but it came out more like a scoff. Barbara, I pay most of the bills. She raised an eyebrow. Do you? That's not what Elise said. She mentioned you've been between things. Projects, was it? She practically tasted the word like it was something sour. I clenched my jaw. I wanted to say so much, but I didn't. Not yet. Look, she continued, pulling a chair out and sitting down like this was a scheduled intervention. I'm not trying to criticize. But if you're going to be living under this roof rent-free, the least you could do is pick up more of the financial slack. Or start paying rent. It's only fair. That's when I turned to face her fully. There was no anger in me, just a calm, quiet disbelief. The kind that simmers beneath the surface, right before something big breaks. Barbara, I said, keeping my voice steady. Do you know whose name is on the deed to this house? She blinked. What? This house? I said, gesturing around us. Do you know whose name is on the title? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was loud enough. That was the first time I saw her smile falter. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I didn't do it right away. I let her words simmer for a few days. Barbara's little speech about pulling my weight echoed in my mind every time I passed her smug face in the hallway. She acted like she hadn't said anything unusual, just a totally reasonable observation from a concerned mother. Elise didn't bring it up either, which made me wonder if Barbara had said more behind my back. The tension thickened into something unspoken and heavy, like fog that never quite cleared. And beneath it, something inside me started to shift. It wasn't just the insult. It was the entitlement. The way Barbara lived in my house like she owned the place. The way she rearranged my kitchen drawers without asking, snooped through our pantry, corrected how I folded my own clothes. The way she'd started referring to our home as Elise's house when talking to friends on the phone, like I was some long-term house guest. All while I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the taxes. And what made it worse was Elise, my Elise, was beginning to crack under her mother's influence. I noticed it in small ways at first. Little things. Elise stopped asking me about my day. Stopped offering to cook dinner on her nights off. She became shorter with me, quicker to sigh, quicker to say, I'm just tired, when I asked if everything was okay. I knew she was under pressure. Her job wasn't easy, but this was different. She'd been tired before. This felt like she was slowly pulling away from me, like someone whispering poison in her ear. I knew who that someone was. The breaking point didn't happen all at once. It was more like a steady leak that suddenly turned into a flood. It started with the groceries. One Saturday morning, I went to make coffee and found the cabinet empty. No beans. No filters. Just a yellow sticky note. Nolan, if you want a specific brand, maybe start buying your own. I stared at that note for a full minute. My hands trembled slightly, not from anger, but from the sheer absurdity of it. I did buy the groceries. Barbara hadn't contributed a single dollar. Yet here she was, drawing territorial lines like a teenager claiming shelf space in a dorm. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I drove to the store, bought the coffee, bought everything I normally stocked. Then, just to spite her, I bought the exact brand of herbal tea she obsessed over and put it back on the shelf without restocking hers. Petty? Maybe. But it felt good. The next week, I noticed my car keys had been moved. I always kept them on the little hook by the door, but I found them on the counter. I didn't think much of it until I checked the mileage later. Barbara had used my car. Not Elise's. Mine. Without asking. I confronted her, and she laughed. I didn't think you'd mind. You're home all day anyway. I told her not to do it again. Her smile didn't budge. You're being very territorial, Nolan. That's not a good look for someone who doesn't pay rent. That word again. Rent. Like she forgot, or pretended to forget, this wasn't just Elise's house. It was mine. Legally. On paper. Signed and filed under my name. That night, Elise barely said 2 words to me. I asked her what was going on. She shrugged. Maybe you could try being more understanding. She's my mom, Nolan. I am being understanding, I said. She's living in our home, my home, for free. And now she's using my car. Without asking. She just needed to run an errand. Then she can ask. That's what normal people do. Elise didn't respond. She turned over in bed and pulled the covers over her shoulder. I lay awake for hours. That's when I started wondering. How much of this was Barbara's doing? And how much of it was Elise simply choosing to side with her? The next morning, things escalated. I came downstairs to find Barbara rearranging my office. Not Elise's, mine. She'd moved my laptop to the dining room table, boxed up my pens, shifted my books to a cabinet, and left another sticky note. This room has much better natural light. Perfect for yoga. Hope you don't mind. I stood there stunned. This wasn't passive aggression anymore. This was a direct statement. You don't matter here. Elise, I called, trying to stay calm. Can we talk for a second? We sat down at the table. I kept my voice level. I laid it all out. The keys, the coffee, the office, the remarks, the notes. I feel like I'm being erased in my own house, I said. She's crossing every boundary, and you're letting her. Elise didn't look angry. She looked tired. She's just trying to help. Nolan, you know how she is. She's used to being in charge. But this isn't her house. Elise didn't respond right away. Then she said something that punched the breath out of me. Well, technically it's mine too. I stared at her. What does that mean? I just mean, you don't have to make everything about ownership. We're married. We share things. This is our home. Our home. Suddenly, I realized what Barbara had done. She'd twisted the narrative. Erased me from the equation. I wasn't a provider anymore. I was a dependent. Over the next week, things got worse. Barbara started holding court in the living room, inviting friends over, my living room, while I was working. Loud voices, tea, gossip. When I asked her to keep it down, she gave me that same damn smile. I didn't realize you were doing anything important, Nolan. I thought you were just watching YouTube. Elise didn't defend me. That Friday, Elise had a friend over, Amy, one of her nursing coworkers. The three of us sat down for a casual dinner. I tried to stay out of it, but Barbara couldn't help herself. You know, she said to Amy, her tone light and breezy. It's amazing how well Elise does supporting the household. All that overtime, and she still comes home and cooks. I blinked. I cook too. Barbara laughed like I'd just made a charming joke. Oh, I'm sure you try. Elise didn't laugh, but she didn't speak up either. Then Barbara dropped it. In fact, I told Elise she should start asking you for rent. It might motivate you to find a real job. Amy looked horrified. I didn't respond. I just stood up and walked out. I didn't sleep that night. My thoughts spun like a carousel I couldn't get off. I kept thinking, this isn't my marriage anymore. It's theirs. I'm just the third wheel. The invisible man in my own house. But it wasn't until 2 days later that the betrayal truly landed. I was on my laptop in the bedroom, trying to update tenant reports, when I saw the email. It was from our bank, a notification about a co-ownership inquiry. Someone had attempted to add a second name to the deed of the house. I stared at it for a solid 10 minutes. Cold spread across my chest. I walked downstairs. Elise was folding laundry on the couch. Barbara was reading in the armchair. Elise, I said slowly, did you try to add your name to the house title? She looked up, startled. What? The bank sent me an alert. There was a request. You listed me as the current sole owner. Which? I am. She flushed. I didn't think it would be a big deal. We're married. I just thought it made sense. No, I said, voice hardening. You didn't think it made sense. Someone put that idea in your head. Barbara didn't even look up from her book. Well, it is common. Most wives are listed on the property after marriage. It's not that unusual. I turned to her slowly. And I'm sure it's just a coincidence you brought up rent last week. Just a coincidence you've been acting like this is your house for months. Elise stood up. Nolan, you're overreacting. You're making this into something it's not. No, I said, backing away. You already did that. I left the room. I didn't leave the house. Not yet. But something inside me snapped. Whatever trust one had left in Elise, whatever patience I'd been clinging to with Barbara, it all crumbled in that moment. And that's when I decided, if they wanted to play power games, they were going to lose. Because this wasn't their house. It was mine. And I had every intention of reminding them exactly what that meant. But not with yelling. Not with drama. With silence. With paperwork. With a plan. When I tell you the days that followed were the darkest I've had in years, I'm not exaggerating. There's something deeply hollowing about realizing the person you thought was on your team has, little by little, crossed over to the other side. Elise hadn't just ignored the warning signs. She'd become part of the problem. And I, the guy who'd kept everything running behind the scenes, had somehow been painted as the freeloader. I didn't confront her again after the deed attempt. I didn't see the point. Anything I said would have been twisted or brushed off as overreaction. I could feel the weight of Barbara's presence in every room, every breath, like she'd wedged herself between us, and Elise couldn't see it. Or didn't want to. Instead, I pulled back. Quietly. I stopped joining them for dinner. I started waking up earlier, and taking my breakfast to the back porch before anyone else stirred. I moved my laptop setup to the garage, where I dusted off an old table and repurposed it as my new workspace. It was cold in the mornings, but I liked it that way. The silence helped me think. I kept to myself, answered emails, handled rental inspections, even started talking to a few contractors about a new duplex I'd been eyeing out in Fairview. And all the while, neither of them noticed I'd gone quiet. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. That part hurt more than I expected. I hit my low point 2 weeks after the deed incident, during a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come home early from a tenant meeting. One of the upstairs units had a leak, and I stepped inside just as Barbara and Elise were sitting in the living room, deep in conversation over tea. I paused in the foyer when I heard my name. "I just don't know what he does all day," Barbara was saying. "He acts like he's managing a company, but what's he really building? Where's the ambition?" Elise sighed. "I don't know, Mom. Sometimes I feel like he's just coasting." Coasting. That word stuck like a splinter. I turned and walked right back out the door before they saw me. Drove aimlessly for an hour. Just enough time for the sun to start dipping low, casting that gold haze across the streets that usually made me feel calm. Not this time. Not after hearing my own wife talk about me like I was dead weight. After everything I'd done for us. For her. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the pull-out couch in the garage, my new sleeping space, and stared at the ceiling. My mind spun through every sacrifice, every moment I'd bit my tongue, every bill I'd paid without a thank you. And then, sometime around 4 a.m., a new feeling settled in. Resolve. I may have hit bottom, but the one upside of hitting the floor is that there's nowhere left to fall. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I'd let things slide too far. I'd let people write my story for me. That ended now. So I started building. Not revenge. Not yet. That would come later. First, I had to rebuild me. I got up that morning and made a list, just a simple doc on my phone. Titled it, Operation Take My Life Back. Corny? Maybe. But I needed something to keep me focused. First item, secure independence. Second, grow the business. Third, decide what kind of life I actually want. That day, I called up a real estate attorney I trusted, Miss Kelsey Moran. She'd helped me with a tricky tenant lawsuit a couple years back and knew her stuff. We set up a meeting. I told her everything about the house, the title, the attempt to add Elise's name without consent, the living situation. She was sharp as ever. "Nolan," she said, tapping her pen against the desk, "this isn't just messy. It's dangerous. You need to protect your assets." "Can I evict them?" I asked hesitantly. She paused. "Technically, yes. It's your house. But legally, given your marriage, you'd be wading into complex waters if you do it wrong. I suggest we take it step by step." She helped me draft a notice of ownership clarification, basically a formal statement that I was the sole legal owner and that no attempts to modify the deed had been approved. We filed it with the county and had copies notarized. Nothing aggressive, just a paper trail, a quiet warning. Next, I started making moves on the business side. I'd been managing 6 properties at that point, but always on a modest scale. I'd let them run themselves, minimal overhead, reliable tenants, safe choices. But now I wanted more. I took meetings with other property owners, asked around about investment opportunities, started working 12-hour days, not out of desperation, but out of drive. For the first time in months, I felt clear-headed, awake. In just a few weeks, I bought into a duplex with a partner I trusted and scoped out a second unit in a transitioning neighborhood. Riskier, sure, but with high reward potential. I rewrote my business website, updated all my listings, even hired a part-time assistant to handle tenant requests. It felt good, really good. Meanwhile, at home, Barbara and Elise barely noticed the shift. They thought I was sulking. Barbara would toss me the occasional snide remark when I came in late. "Long day at the couch office?" And Elise would barely look up from her phone. I didn't bite. Instead, I started recording everything. Not secretly, just responsibly. I tracked expenses, documented every conversation that involved the house, rent, or financial contributions. Not to weaponize, but to protect. If things went sideways, I needed proof. And I had a growing suspicion that things would go sideways. Eventually. But the more I rebuilt my life, the less I feared it. One day, I ran into Amy, Elise's coworker, at the grocery store. She looked awkward at first, like she didn't know if she should speak. But then she smiled. "Hey, Nolan. You doing okay? Yeah, I said. Better than I've been in a while, actually. She hesitated. I wanted to say, I thought what Barbara said at dinner was out of line. You didn't deserve that. I nodded. Thanks. I appreciate that. She glanced at her cart. If it means anything, I always thought you carried yourself with a lot of quiet strength. Elise used to talk about that. I don't know what's going on now, but I hope she remembers that too. That comment stuck with me longer than I expected. Because Amy had seen it. The real me. The guy I was before Barbara moved in and warped everything. And that made me realize I wasn't the one who'd changed. I was the same person. I'd just let myself get too quiet. Too passive. That was over now. Back at home, the energy had shifted. Elise and Barbara still chatted and laughed, but there was tension underneath it. Barbara had started asking probing questions, like whether I'd changed the Wi-Fi password I had, or if I was up to something in the garage. I smiled every time. I wasn't being petty, I was being smart. Calculated. Then came the moment that told me I was truly on the right path. It was a Sunday. Elise came into the garage while I was reviewing blueprints for a new property. She hovered in the doorway. Hey, she said. We haven't really talked lately. I nodded. We haven't. She looked around awkwardly. You've been busy. I have. She shifted her weight. I talked to my mom. She thinks maybe we should set some boundaries. About space. And expectations. I waited. She said she might look into getting her own place soon. Said she feels like she's overstayed. I nearly laughed. Not because of the words, but because I knew Barbara hadn't decided that. She felt it. Felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd sensed that I was no longer passive. That her position wasn't permanent. Okay, I said. I think that's a good idea. Elise hesitated. You're not mad. I met her eyes. No, but I've got a lot on my plate now. I don't have time for chaos. She nodded slowly. You've changed. I'm the same, I said. Just finally acting like it. She left quietly after that. Didn't say much more. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to chase her. Or fix it. Or explain myself. Because I didn't need to. I had a plan. I had power. I had clarity. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It unfolded slowly, like an old blueprint I didn't realize I'd been sketching in the back of my mind for months. Every insult, every passive-aggressive comment, every boundary crossed, it all stacked neatly into rows like dominoes. And now, I was finally ready to knock them down. But not in anger. That was key. I wasn't fueled by rage anymore. That was the old me. The Nolan who sat quiet at family dinners while his mother-in-law called him unemployed with a glass of wine in her hand and a smirk on her face. The Nolan who bit his tongue while his wife of 7 years casually asked the bank to put her name on his property like it was a birthday gift. No, this was something different. This was strategy. The first step was information. I went back through every financial document I had, every property title, mortgage contract, rental agreement, utility bill. I combed through it all with a highlighter and sticky notes. I made copies and stored them in a lockbox in the garage. Just in case. The house we lived in? Fully paid off, no mortgage. Bought it outright 3 years ago after selling a duplex that had tripled in value over the pandemic. The title was in my name only. Always had been. Elise knew that, in the beginning. But after Barbara moved in, she started acting like it was a joint asset just because we were married. That's not how property law works in our state. Not if it's acquired before marriage. And certainly not if there's clear documentation to back it up. Which there was. I made sure of it. Second step? Setting the stage. I knew Barbara was getting restless. She felt the energy shift, even if she couldn't explain it. She started hovering around me more. Asking what I was working on. Peeking into the garage when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She hated not being in control. She thrived on knowing more than everyone else in the room, and now she was flying blind. So I gave her something to see. I started working more visibly. Left folders open on the kitchen table. Left my laptop screen angled just enough to show diagrams, spreadsheets, legal docs. She'd always enter the room with some excuse, getting tea, finding a charger, but her eyes lingered. She never asked directly, but I could tell it was eating at her. One day, I made a phone call while she was in the next room, on speaker. Yes, Mr. Kaplan, I'll be finalizing the documents this week. Yes, my attorney's already signed off. And yes, the tenants are aware of the transfer. We should close before the end of the quarter. I didn't even have a Mr. Kaplan. I made up the name on the spot. But Barbara perked up like a meerkat in tall grass. After that, She started asking Elise questions. Is Nolan selling the house? Why does he need a lawyer? Has he mentioned anything about moving? Elise would relay these things to me at night, cautiously, like she wasn't sure whose side she was supposed to be on anymore. Are you planning something? She finally asked one night as we lay in bed, backs barely touching. I'm always planning something, I replied softly. That answer didn't satisfy her, but I didn't feel the need to elaborate. By then, I'd already reached out to my tenants, dozens of them across 7 properties. I drafted a general update email about property management changes. Nothing alarming, just a heads up that their rent would now be handled by a newly formed LLC, Lockridge Property Group, named after my grandfather. It gave everything a clean break. Professional, impersonal, but more importantly, it separated me from them. Nolan wasn't the guy fixing leaky sinks anymore. Nolan was the owner, the investor, the man behind the curtain. Then came the third step, controlling the narrative. Elise's birthday was coming up in a few weeks. She hadn't said much about it, but Barbara was already planning a family brunch. She loved putting on airs for Elise's friends, loved making the house look pristine and giving off the illusion of control. I offered to help, of course. Said I'd take care of the details. Ordered catering, rented extra chairs, even arranged for a cleaning service to come the day before. Barbara didn't trust it, of course. She was suspicious of how agreeable I'd become. But suspicion makes people sloppy, and I was counting on that. The fourth step? Gathering my allies. Now, I don't have many close friends. I'm not that guy with a dozen drinking buddies and a weekend golf group. But the people I do trust? They're solid. One of them is Ray, my accountant and oldest friend. We've known each other since high school. Ray's not flashy. He's the kind of guy who wears khakis on his days off and uses coupons even when he doesn't need to. But he's smart. Quiet smart. I invited Ray over under the guise of discussing business transitions. We sat in the garage, sipping black coffee while I laid it all out. The deed, the betrayal, the slow erosion of my role in my own marriage. Ray listened without interrupting. Then, after a long pause, he said, "So what's the move?" And I told him. I was going to let Barbara walk straight into her own downfall. I was going to give her the illusion of control, let her strut around like she owned the place, just long enough to make her comfortable. And then I was going to take it all back. But to do that, I needed everything lined up. Not just legally. Emotionally. I needed Elise to see it. Not just hear it. Not just read it. See it. Because right now, she was still under the fog. Still half convinced that Barbara was the voice of reason and I was the moody, prideful husband who couldn't take a joke. I had to crack that illusion wide open. And I had to do it in a way that couldn't be spun or softened. Ray nodded slowly. You're walking a fine line. I know, I said. But I'm done playing the quiet guy. He clapped me on the shoulder. Then let's do it right. Together, we finalized a few critical documents. Created a paper trail. Scheduled a meeting with Ms. Moran, my attorney, to update my will and revise my estate holdings, just in case. And I started moving certain assets out of reach. Small steps. Calculated. I took a week off from house duties entirely. Let Barbara run the place. Let her get comfortable again. I even let Elise believe things were calming down. She started smiling more, cooking dinner again, initiating conversations in the evening. I didn't buy into it. Not anymore. But I let her think I did. Because the final act was almost here. Elise's birthday brunch was the perfect stage. All her friends, a few of her co-workers, even some distant cousins were invited. I made sure the house looked spotless. I rented matching dishware. Set out candles. Bought her a gift, a framed photo of us from our honeymoon, back when things were still real. Barbara preened like a peacock that morning. Wore a pastel dress and pearls. Directed the cleaning crew like she was the Queen of Versailles. I stayed out of her way. Let her feel in charge. And as guests started to arrive, I stayed in the background. Polite, cordial, quiet, but ready. By the time brunch officially started, the house was full. Elise's friends crowded the living room with pastel gift bags and polite smiles. Co-workers from the hospital clustered near the kitchen island swapping stories. And a couple of Barbara's country club acquaintances perched stiffly on the edge of the couch like they were attending a staged photo shoot rather than a birthday. The air smelled like catered pastries and coffee, and under it all sat that familiar tension, the kind you don't notice unless you're the one it's aimed at. I moved quietly through the room, refilling cups, smiling when spoken to, saying almost nothing. Barbara, on the other hand, was in her element. She floated from group to group, laughing just a little too loud, telling people how exhausted Elise had been from supporting the household lately, how proud she was of her daughter for carrying so much responsibility. I caught more than one glance aimed at me afterward, sympathetic, confused, judgmental. I didn't react. I checked my watch instead. When everyone had finally settled with plates in their hands and Elise stood near the dining table opening gifts, I nodded to Ray, who was standing quietly near the back hallway like a guest no one had really clocked yet. Ms. Moran arrived moments later, right on time. She was dressed simply, carrying a slim leather folder under her arm, and she gave me a brief nod of acknowledgement before taking a seat. Barbara noticed her immediately. "And who might you be?" Barbara asked brightly, her smile tight. "A friend of Nolan's," Ms. Moran said politely. Barbara's eyes flicked to me, suspicious, but she turned back just as Elise finished opening her last present. The room erupted in applause. Someone tapped a glass for a speech. Barbara beat them to it. "I'll say a few words," she announced, already standing. "Because this day is about my daughter and everything she's done for this family." I felt Elise tense beside me. Barbara launched into it. How Elise had always been the responsible one, the driven one, how she'd built a career, how she kept everything together. Then, almost casually, she slid the knife in. "And of course," she said, smiling sweetly, "not everyone contributes the same way. But Elise, in her generosity, has never complained, even when she's been carrying more than her share." The room went quiet in that brittle, uncomfortable way people get when they realize they've just been invited into someone else's marriage without their consent. Elise looked down at her hands. My moment had arrived. I stepped forward calmly. No raised voice. No shaking hands. "You're right, Barbara," I said evenly. "Let's talk about contributions." Her smile faltered just barely. "Well, if you insist." "I insist," I said. I turned toward the room. "For those of you who don't know, I've been accused, repeatedly, of being unemployed, of living here rent-free, of being financially dependent on my wife." A ripple of unease moved through the guests. "So I think it's only fair," I continued, "that everyone hears the truth." Barbara laughed lightly. "Nolan, this really isn't the time." "The house," I said, cutting through her words without raising my voice, "is titled solely in my name. Fully paid off. I purchased it 3 years ago with proceeds from a real estate portfolio I manage. I cover the majority of the household expenses: utilities, taxes, insurance, maintenance, groceries, all of it." Barbara stared at me. "And since we're talking about rent," I added, finally turning to face her directly, "you've been living here for over a year without paying a single dollar." The silence was so sharp it rang. Barbara blinked. "That's not. And the country home you moved into before that," I continued. "The one you've been in for almost 4 years now." Now her smile vanished completely. "What are you talking about?" I nodded to Ms. Moran. She stood and opened her folder. "Barbara Sutton," she said clearly. "The residential property located on Glenwood Drive in Fairview has been in Nolan Lockridge's ownership since 2019 under a family trust transfer." A collective inhale swept the room. "You've been living there rent-free as well?" Ms. Moran continued. "No lease, no tenant agreement, no payments recorded. Nolan has covered the property taxes and upkeep the entire time." Barbara's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she whispered. "That house was arranged for me through an associate." "False," Ms. Moran said gently. "The deed is very clear." Barbara turned slowly toward me, eyes wide. You never corrected you?" I said quietly. "No, because you never asked. You just assumed." I turned to the room again. So when she demanded that I start paying rent, when she mocked me as unemployed, she was doing it inside 2 properties that she herself did not pay for. Murmurs broke out instantly. People shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered Elise's name. Elise was staring at me now, truly seeing me for the first time in months. Her eyes were wet, her face pale. "You knew?" she asked softly. "All this time. I didn't hide it," I said just as softly. "I just didn't broadcast it. I never thought I'd need to." Barbara stumbled back into her chair. "This is ambush," she hissed. "You blindsided me in front of everyone." "No," I replied calmly. "You tried to humiliate me in front of everyone. I just told the truth in the same room." Ms. Moran stepped forward again. "There is also the matter of a recent attempt to modify the deed on this residence." That attempt was denied and documented. Further attempts will be considered fraudulent. All eyes went to Elise. She looked stricken. Mom told me it was normal. She said it was just paperwork. Barbara stood abruptly. Because it is normal. You are his wife. And you are not his landlord, Ms. Moran said evenly. The room felt like it was tilting. I never wanted this to be public, I said finally, voice steady. But I'm done being erased in my own home and in my own marriage. Elise's breath hitched. Nolan, I love you, I said, but I will not be diminished for your mother's comfort. Barbara tried to speak again, but the room had already shifted against her. No one met her eyes now. The women who had been nodding along with her earlier looked away. Her power, the social kind she thrived on, was gone. That evening, after the guests left in awkward clusters, the house felt hollow. Barbara retreated to the guest room without a word. Elise sat at the kitchen table in silence. I didn't know, she said finally. I believe you, I said. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted you to choose me without being forced. Tears slid down her face. I failed you. I said nothing. Some realizations have to settle on their own. Barbara moved out within the week. There were no dramatic goodbyes. No apologies. Just suitcases rolling down the front steps and a final, furious look thrown over her shoulder when she realized no one was chasing after her. A month later, Elise asked me if we could start over. Counseling. Boundaries. Space from her mother. All of it. I agreed, but differently than before. With expectations. With clarity. With equal footing. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't rebuilding from the bottom anymore. I was finally standing on the truth.